G'day folks, my name is Rob. Welcome back to another F1 Fantasy video. Today we are looking at my team selection for race week 8. We have the Spanish Grand Prix this coming weekend, a back-to-back right after Monaco. So we're going to go through my team selection, look at some potential team builds and any other news information that can guide our team selection decisions ahead of this coming weekend. If you're enjoying the content, please do subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment. Really appreciate all of that engagement on this channel so far. So we're going to take a look at how my team went in Monaco. As you can see here on the screen, I activated the final fix and it could not have gone less to plan. Despite the fact that Max Verstappen did come through and win and Fernando Alonso also finished on the podium, not really much else to write home about. I activated the final fix on Sergio Perez, who had a stinker of a qualifying. Got in Carlos Sainz, and he literally served up a donut. He was looking good, P4 in qualifying, and I really thought out of him and Ocon, I just thought the Ferrari overall looked a little bit stronger. I was just a bit worried that the Alpine might fall back one or two positions, but that didn't end up being the case at all. Ocon had a blinder of a race. Sainz probably served up one of his worst performances of the season. So not at all what I was hoping for from the chip, and that resulted in a red arrow down to 160k overall. So not overly pleased about it, but at the same time, I'm at peace with the decision. I think at the point in time that I made it, I thought Sainz was, as I said, the best driver to replace Perez with. It just didn't go that way, and I think given the game that is F1 Fantasy, I don't know many, if any, other fantasy games where the delta between what could go wrong and what does go wrong is as big as any other game I've come across. And so when those decisions go the wrong way, they can really hurt you. And unfortunately, I was on the end of that this weekend. But not to worry, we move. But that wasn't even the end of my struggles in Monaco. Stroll didn't even finish the race on -17. And he is one name I'm considering switching up for Spain. We'll get to that in a minute. And then Hulk, 7 points. You can't really ask for much more from someone at his price. But again, didn't pick the right budget driver for, I think, the 6th race running or something. So as I've said before, do not go with that budget option, but I'm not going to get into the semantics of who to choose under 5 million in too much of this video. And then Red Bull and Aston Martin. Red Bull, obviously, Max did a lot of the damage there for that score, and then the Aston Martin wasn't helped by the fact the Stroll DNF'd. But not to worry, as I said, went slightly backwards and not exactly what I thought my first chip of the season would go, but that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. So I was just looking at my league. I haven't really gone over it too much so far this season, but I thought I'd share with you kind of where it's at. I've got the league code just on the screen here, so join if you haven't done so already. And as you can see here, dropped back a little bit. I think I was in the mid 200s. So not a great result, but if you see your name on the screen, be sure to comment below. Let me know who's your team. Obviously, great to see Alonso first at 1956 points. Hopefully he does get his first win of this season with Aston Martin. I think it's only a matter of time. Could it happen at the Spanish Grand Prix, at his home Grand Prix? I'm not so sure. We'll get to that again in a minute, but wouldn't that be a fairy tale finish for him at his home Grand Prix? And then, Taka Power is only at 27 points behind. Bully Dirica F1, apologies if I mispronounced that, rounds out the top 3. But as I said, if you see your name on the screen, be sure to drop a comment below and let me know who your team is. So I was, I'll refresh this. Let's go into this. So I want to look at my team for Spain. I was tinkering with a few builds earlier, so that's what you might have just seen on your screen. We'll get to that in a minute. But this is the state of affairs for my team this weekend. As I said, Stroll, 2nd DNF in 6 races this season, so not something I'm overly pleased about. And it means it's also hurting your constructor score as well when he doesn't manage to finish the race. As far as the left-hand side of the screen is concerned, the Red Bulls, I'm still feeling pretty confident in despite Perez's pretty poor weekend, and Alonso's as safe as houses. And then you can't go past Aston Martin at 7 million. Like they're not going to leave my team this season. I can guarantee it. So those fives are at least four of the five. Certainly the three Red Bulls and Alonso. Alonso, Aston Martin, Verstappen, and Red Bull are not going anywhere anytime soon. Perez, Hulkenberg, and Lance Stroll for me are the ones I could really tinker with a little bit to get a bit of variety in there. So for me, coming into Spain, as I mentioned, the DNF for Stroll has hurt me and many others a couple of times already this season. He's the first name on my list. I'm thinking of moving on. And the logical replacement for him at and around that 7.6 million is Pierre Gasly. We've seen from Gasly, he's had a really good start with Alpine so far this season. I really like what I've seen from him. 64 points through the first 6 races, so that's just over 10 points per race. At 8 million, 8.1 million, like that's pretty good value for money if you ask me. So he fits quite nicely into this slot for me here. Unfortunately, because as has plagued me the last few weeks, I seem to be 0.1 short of any of the budget drivers I want to try and move to. But if you have flexibility to move up to Tsunoda, I'm obviously 0.1 off from him. I think he's an objectively better pick than Hulkenberg. But for me, I'd obviously have to settle for one of these two guys down here. And Logan Sargent, he's scored -1 points across 6 races. So, and he's also just had a few rookie moments that doesn't fill me with a lot of confidence heading into Spain. So Hulk for me, I really like him. He was in my team for Monaco just because of his strong qualifying record through the first 5. I do worry that if he does qualify well again in Spain, he may regress slightly on the Sunday, but I guess I'm not really given too much of an option at this point. So that for me, I think is probably my favourite build if I'm pivoting away from Stroll. However, if I do, for whatever reason, see a qualifying practice times more representative of a car that is top 3, then he would obviously stay in my team, and then I'd obviously pivot to someone around that 5 million mark. Finally, I can get to Alex Albon. It's only taken me 6 weeks, but I really like him. Again, if we look at his scores here, hasn't really shown what he's truly capable of. I know obviously he had a couple of back-to-back DNFs to start the season off. That Bahrain performance, obviously, from a fantasy perspective, is his best drive of the season. And then, averaging 1 point across his last 3 races is not great. So for the season, -18, you look at that number, obviously not super encouraging, but I do have faith that he's the kind of driver that, even if he doesn't get out of Q1, can stick it in and around the top 10. We've seen him do that many times before, and I'm confident he's got a couple of those performances in him coming up. So if I stick with Stroll, I tell you what, I talk about going away from Stroll now, and then watch him put, top 5 practice times on the board on Friday and Saturday, and he'll reel me right back in. So, that's an alternative build if I decided to not go the Gasly route. And I know it's very easy to stick with the Red Bulls given how dominant they are. I still think they are the strongest team on the grid. And as far as fantasy assets are concerned, also the most underpriced. So it is hard for me to pivot away from them. If we look at f1fantasytools.com, an excellent resource for your fantasy teams, you can see here Red Bull are just substantially better in terms of fantasy output compared to any of their peers. It is hard, obviously, to pivot away to someone like a Mercedes or a Ferrari just because Verstappen and Perez are putting it in that P1 on Sunday every week. So it is, a stretch for me to reconsider any other team. But if you have a second or third team and you want to mix it up a little bit, then I think that opens the door for Mercedes or Ferrari. Or B, if you're a bit more of a high upside, high differential player, then I think there's a lot of potential in the Mercedes and the Ferrari. I'm not seeing it just yet, just because of how dominant Max has been. But I do think they are slightly closing the gap, the Mercedes and the Ferraris. So just keep an eye on them as we move into more of the non-street circuit destinations coming up on the calendar, as you can see here. Spain, Canada, Austria, Silverstone. So just something to keep an eye on. If we go back to here, if we decide to chop, for argument's sake, Red Bull from our team. I mean, Ferrari has delivered a little bit more pace in the last couple of weeks. Not really that encouraging in Monaco, but I do have faith that they will kind of rediscover some of that pace we saw from them last season. A build I'm really liking, if we dropped in Ferrari here, would be to actually move towards two drivers, which I wouldn't say I would have paired together at any point this season, but based on what we've seen so far, Gasly, as I mentioned, I'm a big fan of his. I think he fits really nicely into a number of different team builds. The other driver for me, and this is obviously a little bit of recency bias creeping in, but is Esteban Ocon. So we saw a great drive from him in Monaco. He's averaging 39 points across the season, but obviously we haven't seen really that many good drives, at least from a fantasy perspective, through the first 5 races or so. Monaco, obviously, his best result. But, from these scores here, you can tell he's slowly building towards something, and he is a driver that has consistently been able to stick it around kind of like P7, P8 in the past. So, that's good for about 10-ish points from a fantasy perspective anyway. So if you like that, you think he's got potential, and at 10%, that's a great differential in a game like F1 Fantasy. So I think, if he can deliver that and realise the same pace that Gasly's shown as well through the first 5 or 6 races, then that triple-double, I like to call it, double Alpine, double Aston Martin, double Red Bull, and then Ferrari there, that could really underline a strong team. And the best thing as well is that there's no budget driver to kind of contend with either. I think there's just that unpredictability with some of those budget drivers. So you're getting a lot more consistency and reliability. As I said, Red Bull constructor, objectively better, I think, than Ferrari. But if you do want to hedge your bets a little bit, then I think this is a great build if you want to roll with the Ferrari guys. So the last one I want to look at, and again, much like Ferrari, I don't necessarily think it is the strongest or objectively the strongest. But again, we've seen some consistency from the Mercedes guys through the first few races. And they're obviously not, or both of them are not in the podium places every week, but they are kind of in the kind of middle part of the top 10 just about every week. And we've seen also through the first 6 races, only one DNF between those two drivers. So I think that's a really encouraging sign. As I mentioned, reliability is a really key facet to this game. If we just filter for DNFs here, not classified, nothing from Hamilton and only one from Russell in Australia, there's only a couple of teams who can say they've not had a DNF. Obviously the Red Bulls, and then I think it's the Haas, and I'll get to the Magnussen DNF shortly. But that reliability that we've seen from Mercedes in the past, it's staying true again this year. So if you want to go for a team that's more than likely going to both finish the race, and I think Mercedes is a really good option there. For me, the logical choice, if we stick with Perez, I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I'm choosing the right guys, is to go with, again, someone like Pierre Gasly. As you can tell, I'm a big fan of him. And then the second driver to fit in there would probably be Kevin Magnussen. And I say that just because even though, Piastri, for instance, he had a solid race on the weekend, Albon, I just think from a consistency perspective, I've seen and liked a lot of what Magnussen's drives have consisted of this season. And if we do go back to, obviously, that DNF, F1 Fantasy Tools calculated that Magnussen didn't necessarily DNF the Monaco Grand Prix. The reason being is, and I'll bring you to their tweet here, again, give them a follow if you haven't done so already on Twitter, is because he completed just under 90% of the laps, which is what warrants the not classified. However, if he drove that extra lap to the pits, that would push him above the 90% threshold, and as a result, they deemed that he should really have scored 1 point instead of what I think we've got here is minus 19. So just something to keep in mind. You can make the case either way, but if we, for argument's sake, rule that as not a DNF, which is what they've recorded him here, they, along with Red Bull, are the only 2 teams to have yet to record a DNF from both drivers. So I think that reliability and consistency is going to be huge if Magnussen is able to continue that trend into the coming weeks. And then you combine that with a team like Mercedes, as I said, which is also very reliable. Red Bull, also very reliable. And then we haven't seen a DNF from Fernando Alonso. I think that's a really kind of safe team. Again, not probably scoring quite as many points if Verstappen and Perez are going to be kind of sticking it around that P1, P2. But if you're trying to avoid those budget drivers, those high risk drivers that are likely to DNF, then I really like this build here. Another one that I thought about is if you're wanting to hold on to the Red Bull constructor just because of the upside that kind of provides compared to your Mercedes, bring him back in, or the constructor back in. I guess the scapegoat would have to be Perez, only because I don't think you can afford, unless you're going back to the template build I'm showing, without covering a bit of Mercedes. Well, you'd have to drop in George Russell in his place, and then you pair him with someone like Pierre Gasly or Lance Stroll if you want that. But again, if we're trying to hedge our bets a little bit, then Gasly comes in for me, and then that leaves us with someone like Nico Hülkenberg down here. But again, if you wanted to stick Stroll in there instead, you swap Hülkenberg out for a budget driver. That's probably a little bit more on the dearer side. So it'd probably be Tsunoda or Joe there. But I'm not going to get into the tinkering too much. So I guess that George Russell pick really gives you a bit of that coverage from Mercedes. If you also want to make sure that you're covering the Max Verstappen likely podium or win in that case. And then the last build I wanted to look at, I'm not suggesting this is anywhere near as good as all the other ones that we've covered so far, but I wanted to look at a few differentials, and I myself am not someone that plays the ultra differential game. I'm sorry, that's not the team we want. But I think if you're the kind of guy or the kind of girl that likes to have some fun with who you're scoring, with your picks, how much they're scoring and their ownership, I think this one I'm about to show you anyway could really knock your socks off a little bit. One of the spicier teams I was looking at, and this consists of double Red Bull, Mercedes, double Aston Martin. We'll drop in Nico Hülkenberg, and the spicy pick for me is Lando Norris. Norris hasn't really featured in too many of my conversations, and that's really just because the McLaren, for the most part this season, hasn't looked all that great. I think only recently we've seen them come through the field a little bit more. They obviously had that double points finish in Monaco, which is a great result for them. And I do think they're still slower than the Alpine. So that, if we're going off the number of teams that would fill out that top 10, that would put him just outside the points. However, and I also say this is just his history. Spain hasn't really been a great circuit for him either. He's been in the points 8th last year, 8th the year before that, 10th the year before that, and then a DNF in 2019. So I'm not suggesting that Norris is going to fetch you a podium unless for whatever reason carnage happened and he just managed to crank out a top 3, top 4. But if we go back to F1 Fantasy Tools, scroll down to here, Norris, 6 points, again, not amazing by any means at his price point. You're really hoping he's getting something like a 19-pointer that week to justify his inclusion in your team. But he is quite lowly owned. And so I think at 17% could be a bit of an ultra differential at that price point. Ocon again is also another one. I think, look, if you didn't want Norris, then I think you could easily drop in Ocon instead. If you're liking him, that would just give you more money for Hulk. So I think I'm getting a little bit carried away with all the different builds you could do. I think Red Bull is certainly the fastest and the best build that's template, and it's going to be template for a reason for the foreseeable future, unless we see any major changes to pricing in the game. But I did want to try and mix up my team selection a little bit. I know it's gone a little longer than I would have liked because I feel like I'm just getting quite repetitive every week with who I'm picking and that budget slot, which is not really what we want to talk about. So yeah, I think if we go back to it, it'll probably be the triple Red Bull build for me, and then figure out whether I want to go Hulk and Gasly or Stroll and Tsunoda or something like that. But I think for me right now, this is kind of where I'm leaning towards at the moment. As far as DRS boost is concerned, Max Verstappen not going anywhere anytime soon. Wanted to have a look at some of his results as well. Spain last year he won. He's had 2 second places in 2021 and 2020, 3 thirds in 2018, 2019. So I wonder, can he continue that trend heading into Spain with his triple double? I should stop saying that because I'm getting carried away and we're not watching basketball. But I think he's in the box seat to win again. Make it 3 on the trot for him. So anyway, that's my team selection for this week. As I said, if you've got any other builds, if you're in the top 10 in my league, do comment below. Let me know where your team's at, how you're shaping up for this week. And as I said, thanks again for all the love and support. Good luck with your teams this weekend, guys. I'll see you all very soon.